Hello guys, it's Gabi from Genial Care again. Today we have a genial conversation with Dr. Erin Lozott, behavior analyst and speech-language pathologist. Me and Lílian talked with Dr. Erin about AAC importance in children with ASD and other disabilities.
So, Erin, first of all, thank you for sharing your experience and knowledge with us today. And I will ask you, what do you think is the keys for success for AAC implementation?
Okay, great. Well, I think one key to success right off the board is to understand that there is a communication bill of rights, and that to know what the bill of rights, the communication bill of rights includes before you even begin. That in itself is so important. The other thing that is essential is to understand the concept of someone with complex communication needs. Okay, because there's an entire field of study that surrounds somebody that has complex communication needs, or the CCN, that goes along with those that really you need to respect this communication bill of rights. Then you have to understand what is considered effective communication. What is our ultimate goal here? What are we wanting from this individual? And what do we need without a diagnosis, let's say, to have effective communication with another person, to send and receive messages? Then we have to understand that there's this concept of what I think it's a very interesting acronym, because it's called SNUG in English, SNUG. But this is the concept that the overarching goal of AAC is often that someone can have spontaneous, novel utterance generation. So they can, for translation purposes, someone can generate their own thought without being prompted to share with you across functions of communication. And if you start diving into the world of AAC for a person with autism or a person with any other complex communication need, and you don't have this kind of mindset and knowledge, then you're already kind of starting in a place that's missing a large component of what you need to move forward successfully, right? So this is kind of the behind the scenes stuff we have to know as both a professional and a parent. Then we have to be able to understand, like I started with, that there's a comprehensive assessment process, and that there are true sets of communicative competencies we need to be looking at and understanding where this person's at across each of these communicative competencies before we ever start to talk about what device, for that matter, we're going to use for what goals we're setting and how we're planning for this person's access to communication. Once we have all of these pieces and we know the competencies, we get that there's a bill of rights and this is a complex communication person, and what effective communication is or isn't, we have SNUG in place, right? And we are ready then, with the results of this comprehensive assessment, to begin planning, and to plan as a team, not as an individual, and set some clear goals. And if obviously the person that you're planning for is of age to participate in this process, that we're getting their feedback on what their needs are. And the family is an active partner in this process. And then we go on to making sure that the people that are going to be communicating, the communication partners in that person's life, that we have a whole plan for them, from training to programming to planning to responding to initiating, that is in sync and aligned with the person's intervention plan, because otherwise the person's on an island by themselves, right? And communication is a two-way street. Then we go into the literature, and we go into the evidence-based treatment options and strategies for autism spectrum disorder, if this is the population of individuals that you're going to be working with AAC. And we look to the National Professional Development Center and the evidence-based practices for autism. And we pull the treatment strategies and the teaching strategies out from there, with the exception of some differences that we have to look at specifically to AAC. For instance, prompting. We have to understand that prompting in AAC is different than prompting in a traditional ABA-based teaching methodology. So we never use hand over hand prompting in AAC, because otherwise you're acting as a tool. You know, you're facilitating someone's intent, you're prompting intent. And as I said before, that's never okay. The most intrusive prompt for AAC, which is different than what people probably have learned when they're learning to teach a person with autism for skill acquisition, is hand under hand, but it's only used in rare occasions. So really almost a gestural, what we consider like a light cue prompt to where the picture is located, or if you're using aided communication, would be the most intrusive. We also go from a place of least restrictive to most restrictive versus most restrictive to least, because actually an error in AAC is a communication teaching opportunity, right? So knowing the evidence-based practices for autism, if this is, or your population that you're working with, and then understanding the rules, and we can call them the gold standard rules if you want in AAC, and how to marry those is going to set you up for success. If you only have one or the other, then you're not going to know how to toggle and combine effectively the intervention strategies. With AAC, you also have to set yourself up for success, have cultural considerations, because in every culture around the world, there's different cultural rules about communication. And if you don't take those into consideration and you're teaching an intervention plan based on a target goal outside of that child's cultural rules and expectation for their family members, then that is going to set that person up to fail. And this should happen regardless of AAC being into play, but it's even more so, I guess, emphasized when there is some sort of augmented or supplemental system or strategy to verbal language or oral language. And so then we individualize even more, right? And we're trialing and we're working together. And we have this ongoing data collection and assessment process that's happening, and collaboration and team planning across all the people that are part of this person's communication world. So mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, siblings, brothers, teachers, if there's a driver, if there's a cook, if there's a therapist, if there is a friend, all of these people need to be included in this conversation, because otherwise, the minute that child is successful in one environment with one person and it's all mapped out, then you go to the next, and either there's no generalization or the person's expectation, nobody's on the same page. And the only person that's at a disadvantage there is then that person with the communication need. And so there's lots of little rules then that go into the planning process. So a little rule that makes a big difference is that if someone does have a picture system or a voice, a voice activated speech generating device, but they actually come up and wave to greet you and look at your eyes and wave and make a sound, we never have the person go back to their system to then re-say hello. You never have to go back and re-request, because you're asking then someone to communicate the same message 2 times back to back. And if they didn't have a device or a system or strategy, and they didn't have a complex communication need, no one would ever ask anybody else to do that. It would seem odd or strange. That's not how we teach. And so we honor all forms of communication that are conventional, that are clear. If someone comes up to you and goes like this into your body and you don't know what they're trying to communicate to you, you can say, it looks like you have something to tell me, or you're trying to send a message. I'm not understanding. Could you please try again? And here's a way to do it, right? That's different than hi. Touch your device and say hi again. the same thing goes with speech. If someone is working on speech and they're trying, we don't make them say it 7 times until it's clear, because then communication becomes slower. It becomes more effortful, right? It becomes more aversive. It's not motivating. And then our ultimate goal of respecting someone's right to communicate and having communication, spontaneous communication for that person's to generate that novel idea to you, then we're basically putting up barriers and saying, we're not going to receive your message, and we're going to place demands on you to receive your message. And so this is what I think is best practice, is respecting the rights of others, as understanding these big standards, the integrations in, across fields, who's on the team and what their roles and responsibilities are, how to plan. And then from the little rules, which are not little, you know, if you couldn't speak and you couldn't, or if you could, but you couldn't get your point across, what would you expect? How would you expect somebody, or how would you want someone to support you? And when we think about it like that, if I was anxious and I was like, Lillian, but I can't get it out because something traumatic just happened, or I got too stressed, or I was too excited, would I want you to say it again? Say it again, go back, go to across the room and get your words, and then come back and tell me now? Who's going to wait for that? Communication needs to be fast. And so the goal of AAC, although it will never be a perfect replacement for verbal language, and we're all very much aware of that, is to make it as easy, as effortless, as fluid, as reinforcing, as efficient and effective as possible, and to honor all forms of communication in different moments that are conventional, to be a good communication partner, a respectful communication partner to somebody, so that they can continue to feel empowered and motivated to communicate when you know it's the hardest thing they're having to do on a moment-to-moment basis.
So thinking about family environment, what do you think family and caregivers need to know to have positive results in the implementation of EAC? And so what do you understand they need to receive as information and support for this?
I think that when you're talking about the road to success for communication partners, because families are going to be primary communication partners, they have to understand how to maximize their success. So training of the family members on not just the goals of communication, but actually how to use the system, how to reprogram or program for changes in vocabulary. If it's a technology-based system, how to use the device. What if they need a full-fledged training that's ongoing, and just the operational pieces of that for that matter. All of those competency areas that you're assessing in the child for communicative competencies need to be domains of training for parents when they have a child or a family member that's going to be an AAC user. So when you are maximizing success, you're going to work on teaching families systematically in a very clear scope and sequence, let's say this one technique or this one concept at a time, and have them have the ability to practice. So taking Ruby for a minute and taking why Ruby works so well, what the research says makes a difference in Ruby as a parent training program versus a different methodology, is that it takes very clear concepts and it focuses on one concept at a time because it matches adult learning, right? And then you give the parents the ability to practice the implementation, transferring their knowledge to practice for that one concept and something that they need to work on with their child to make a difference. Then you go to concept 2, and each concept builds on each other, and the parent is able to focus and engage. For AAC, the success of a parent or a communication partner, it's the same. So you're going to pick this one concept you're going to focus on with this one salient technique or feature you want to train on that's very well defined in context. And you're going to then give that partner, that family member, practice opportunities. Just like we need to give our children or whoever our AAC users are, teenagers, adults, multiple opportunities to practice communication, to make perfect, if you will. We need to give parents multiple supported practice opportunities to start to feel comfortable and have this be second nature versus very cumbersome and difficult and never feeling comfortable because I don't practice it enough with support, and then the support isn't systematically faded back. And then thinking with that parent, because this is really this collaborative coaching concept with them, once you start small and after that parent has achieved small approximations of successes, that you expand systematically from there in their knowledge so that they could truly digest. It's presented in digestible parts. So what you want to make sure that parents also know, so they can be aware of this is happening and self-advocate that it changes, are the barriers to success in communication partners. For example, if someone's focusing on what's wrong versus what we want the parent to do, what they're not doing right, or the family member or the communication partner to do, that's not going to be helpful, just like it's not helpful to focus on the non-compliant or maladaptive behavior versus what you want to teach the child to do and the positive behavior support concept. If you try to change too many behaviors of a family member or communication partner at one time, they're probably going to get overwhelmed and they're going to opt out or feel that it's aversive. And just like when you're trying to teach too many things without a systematic scope and sequence for a child, that they kind of have the scattered skill profile, or they have device abandonment or AAC abandonment because it becomes demanding and too effortful, not reinforcing enough. We want to make sure that we're not also, the parents understand that AAC training and their ability to be successful, it's a marathon. It's the longest race of your life, and it's okay to go slow and steady. It's not supposed to be a miracle that happens like this overnight. And if we set our families up to set them up for success, if we're honest up front, that small changes are very significant and they're going to happen in a slow and steady manner over time. If we do this in the way that we should, then they won't be rushing to find where the next, why hasn't this worked? It's going too slow, so now I want to opt out. So this is our communication and training of families and making sure they have this information. If we try to change too many behaviors of the individual that's needing communication supports at one time, it's going to be difficult for the communication partner and the family members, in general, to keep up. If we try to work across multiple settings all at one time, this is going to be more difficult for a family member. If we don't teach a family member how to connect what they're doing to the outcome of the child behavior or the client behavior, let's say, they're not going to know how to replicate that. So when we are supporting and maximizing the success of a communication partner, a family member, if you will, we need to have specific positive reinforcement that tags their strategy with the outcome of the behavior of that child, which is just good coaching, right? So if I say, oh, that was really great, Lillian, you did an awesome job using the, supporting your child and saying help last week. What specifically did that mom or dad do, or grandma or grandpa or teacher, that made a difference in that child's data that we took to show that they made progress and help? So when you were holding the picture up and waited 3 seconds, right, for your child to have an opportunity to respond, and then recasted and reflected and expanded, and then reinforced your child within 20 seconds, your child said hi independently or asked for help independently every time. When you waited 2 seconds, et cetera, et cetera. And so when we provide parents with the recipe for success of why what they did worked, and we reinforce that, then they can replicate. And when they can replicate, then they will continue to be successful because we've empowered them to be independent versus dependent on us as providers. And so there are 5 key partner ingredients, maybe more, but there's 5 to speak of. There's the setting. We need to make sure that the setting, the environment that our partners are working in, is fostering communication opportunities. and support. Because if there's not an opportunity, and this goes back to intervention planning, I never see opportunities for initiation of communication, even though we know that you have to have, there's literally a ratio of how many nonverbal bids for communication per minute to have creative language acquisition come online, right? We know you need a minimum of 2 nonverbal bids initiated by a child to someone per minute to have creative language, to even be at the base rate that it needs to have enough initiation to have language start to kind of really have this cascading effect and have language come online. We need to provide parents and family members with training on aided language input so that their language and their use of the system can be modeled and their language can be understood by the individual who relies on AAC, and that the individual is not put in a place where they have to only process verbal language, which is the hardest language to process because it's processed as social information in the brain, and social communication is the core deficit of autism. So we want to work from the person's strength versus weakness. We also want to make sure that the partners know, like I said earlier in our conversation, that augmenting spoken input is required to ensure comprehension. And so if we don't ensure our families, while they're modeling on their picture board, their device, whatever it may be, or they're gesturing, that they're actually also speaking, to have this pairing procedure and impact comprehension of the individual relying on AAC. We need to make sure that Marlene, Dr. Sotelo, our executive director, I think coined this term possibly, or at least I think she did, but this concept of waiting, or what we call the power of the pause. It is uncomfortable at first to wait. Family members and communication partners need to learn to wait, to allow for that opportunity to happen, allow for that individual's brain to say, I need to do something here. Something's not happening. I need to communicate a message, so that they have the time to process what's happening and the time to generate, to generate this spontaneous novel utterance. And so that is the biggest thing that I see as a breakdown. The biggest breakdown in a communication partner is not waiting long enough. And I always say, just when you think you've waited long enough, wait again. I think that the standard time to wait is sometimes, I don't know how you translate this in Portuguese, but like if you wait 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, you're probably just at that point of processing part of it. Sometimes our kids need 4, 1,000, 5, 1,000 to even scratch the surface of having processed the information to have an opportunity without us prompting too early. And again, if we're not prompting intent, we should be waiting until intent is showed, right? Or fostering something that's tempting, setting up a communication temptation to allow for an opportunity for someone to have motivation, to have intent to communicate. And then finally, confirming. So understanding that the message to ensure, right, that this is an accurate interpretation, that I received your message clearly and that I know what you're asking. So teaching communication partners to confirm that their understanding of what the individual relying on AAC is the message they're trying to send has been received accurately. I don't know that a lot of people do that. And that's why recasting what someone has said or tried to communicate and then expanding is such a significant strategy for effective communication going in a two-way, interaction. So those are the keys to success. I know there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to this. And I think that that's sometimes where the breakdown happens, is that someone only gets a piece of the information. And they don't realize that if you flesh this out, there's like layers and layers and layers of things, because this is an entire field of study. It's an entire discipline in itself. It's a subspecialty. And it's not just for speech and language providers. It's for all people that are teaching people with complex communication needs, or that are playing a role of a communication partner, even if they're not the professional.
When I was listening you, I was thinking about some things, and we need to finalize moment. So I think to ask you just to finish the talk, um, saying something for parents and professionals in Brazil.
Parents and professionals need to be partners in this process. They need to see each other as collaborative support systems and guides. And a professional is not an expert in any one child. A professional may have knowledge in a field, but the parent is the expert in the child. And to ensure that parents have and ask for, advocate for the education and training that they need from the professional to be able to be the best parent that they can be for their child, always still remaining in the seat of the parent and not becoming their child's own therapist, because that's not fair to a parent. To have to be the therapist and the mom or dad or the grandma and grandpa. They deserve and they have the right to have the same experiences that parents with children that don't have complex communication needs have. And so then to professionals to understand that parents have the right and should be parents, and those interactions with their children are just as valuable, if not more valuable, than the intervention that we provide when we're direct service providers. You have to have a balance. You have to have both. And that children with autism and complex communication needs are children, or adults with autism and complex communication needs are adults. They're humans. And when it comes to communication, to always stop and think, how would I want someone to treat me if I could not get my message across? And also to think, how would I communicate if I didn't have a better way to get my message across? If I was sitting in the back of the car and I couldn't communicate where I needed to go, and someone's driving me and I didn't know where I was going, how would I feel? And in those moments, what would my behavior look like and what would be the message I'm communicating? Because nobody does anything that we don't do without being provoked. And so when we bringing it back to communication and behavior, that we need as a community of parents and professionals working with individuals that have different developmental needs, complex communication needs, we need to understand that behavior is communication and communication is behavior, and these disciplines and these interventions must be combined. And for parents to know that so that they can advocate that they're not having a provider work on an island with their child outside of another provider, that we're planning. You have one intervention plan for a child or a person that integrates all of the pieces and parts. And so then the parent gets trained in one and can work systematically to feel empowered. And then finally, that we presume potential in everybody. Just because we cannot speak doesn't mean that we don't understand. And just because we speak doesn't mean that we do understand. And so when we're communicating all of these wonderful keys to success and strategies, I think it's really important if there's a person in the room that isn't relying on AAC or that has a complex communication disorder, that we are respecting that they very well may understand what we're doing, and nobody likes to be talked about in front of themselves. And we really shouldn't be doing that even with 2 and 3-year-olds, assuming that they don't understand. So we should just talk about them in front of them without telling them that we need to speak about them to help them. And so I think this concept of respecting the rights of the individuals in which we serve, ensuring everybody has a voice, even if it's in an alternative or a supplemental or an augmented manner, or using multiple modes versus one, because that's a misunderstanding. So you only recommend one strategy or system, that hopefully we can become those agents of change for the families and the other professionals. And even when the knowledge and the literature is not translated into your language or the next language, that there'll just be this common set of principles that everybody abides by and follows, because it's what's the most respectful and sound and common sense for those that aren't able to articulate what they need, in a more conventional way.
Thank you. It was amazing.